Have you ever held something in your hands and felt the weight of centuries resting in your palms? The kind of object that seems to hum with a story all its own, something that connects you not just to a moment, but to an entire legacy. There's a magic in objects that carry history forward, and few artifacts capture that mystery more than the legendary Palantry stones. These weren't just rocks shaped by human hands. They were living pieces of fate, bound to the flow of time itself, and their story begins with one woman's extraordinary vision. Before we step into the misty valleys of Eldoria, we'd love to know where you're joining us from tonight, and what hour your own journey into myth and meaning has begun. Let us know in the comments below. It's always special to feel the threads of our community weaving together across time zones and borders. Picture this, an ancient valley draped in silver mist, where the air itself seems to whisper with the voices of spirits. Here, in a place untouched by greed or haste, a master artisan named Alara works by the soft glow of starlight. Her hands move with a precision born not of practice alone, but of purpose. She is carving the very first Palantry stone, guided by celestial beings who have chosen her for a task far greater than craftsmanship. They have entrusted her with a vision to create something that can bridge time itself, connecting the wisdom of the past with the hope of the future. And as her blade meets the stone, she isn't just shaping rock, she is weaving destiny. Her hands tremble, not from weariness, but from the profound understanding that one wrong move, one moment of doubt, could unravel everything. This is no ordinary art. It is a sacred act. Each stroke of her tool is a promise. Each breath she takes is a prayer. She knows that what she is creating will ripple across ages, touching lives she will never meet, shaping futures she can only glimpse in dreams. This is where our story truly begins, not with a kingdom or a battle, but with a single person, a single stone, and the courage to believe that something small, made with love and reverence, can change the world forever. And this, friends, is only the first thread in a tapestry that spans centuries, a story of light and shadow, wisdom and ambition, that will unravel together in the moments to come. The air grows still as Alara takes a final, steadying breath. This is the moment she has been preparing for, the reason the celestial guides chose her above all others. She begins to speak, but these are no ordinary words. They are ancient, primordial sounds that seem to hum within the very fabric of the world around her. Each syllable is a note in a melody older than the mountains, a language of pure intention taught to her by the starlit spirits who watch from the heavens. Her voice doesn't echo in the quiet valley. Instead, it is absorbed by the stone in her hands, weaving strands of ethereal light into its crystalline structure. You can almost see the energy flowing from her lips, a shimmering cascade of silver and gold that wraps around the Palantry, sinking deep into its heart. The stone begins to respond, its core igniting with a soft, rhythmic pulse that beats in time with some unseen, universal rhythm. It is alive now, bound irrevocably to the great, flowing river of time itself. But this act of creation, this miraculous binding, comes at a cost. As the final word leaves her lips, a wave of profound exhaustion crashes over her. The light in the stone holds steady, but the color drains from Alara's face. She slumps forward, her hands trembling as she carefully sets the glowing artifact down. It's not merely physical fatigue she feels. It is as if a part of her own vitality, her very life force, has been woven into the stone alongside the light. She understands instantly that this is the fundamental law of such profound magic. True power cannot be simply taken, it must be exchanged. For something to be truly bound to fate, something of equal value must be given. This is the sacred balance. Her weakness is not a sign of failure, but the proof of her success and the price of her devotion. This hard-earned lesson, learned in the silent aftermath of creation, will become the first and most important tenet for every Palantry that follows. Power is never free. It is always a transaction with destiny. Yet for every light cast, a shadow grows longer. In the deep, silent woods bordering Eldoria, another watched Elara's triumph from a distance. The sorcerer Kale had seen the celestial glow from his isolated tower, a sight that twisted something deep within him. He was a man of considerable talent, his own magical abilities sharpened by years of dedicated, if solitary, study. But where Alara's heart held reverence, Kale's festered with a burning need for recognition. He saw not a sacred gift for the people, but a testament to power. Power he was not chosen to wield. This perceived slight, this exclusion from the celestial favor bestowed upon Alara, curdled his ambition into a bitter, green envy. Driven by this resentment, Kale retreated to his workshop, determined to forge his own Palantry. He gathered the finest quartz, lit his forge with enchanted flames, and began his work, but his process was a hollow mimicry. He lacked the celestial guidance, the whispered words of the starlit spirits. Instead, he relied on force of will and raw magical energy, trying to compel the stone to obey rather than inviting it to awaken. His incantations were commands, not requests. His focus was on the glory the stone would bring him, not the wisdom it could share. The results were as flawed as his intentions. The stones he created would flicker with a harsh, uneven light before fracturing with a sound like shattered glass. Each failure was a monument to his impatience, a physical manifestation of his hunger for a shortcut to greatness. These unstable creations reflected not the flow of time, but the turbulent storm of his own ego. Watching another soft pulse of light emanate from Alara's valley, Kale made his fateful decision. If he could not create such a stone himself, he would simply take one. He convinced himself that the secret was locked within the physical object, a code he could crack, if only he could hold it, study it, and dominate it with his own magic. He believed her success was merely a technical puzzle he could solve, missing the fundamental truth that the stone's power was born from partnership, not possession. Under the cover of a brewing storm, with thunder masking his footsteps, he moved toward Alara's workshop. His plan was set. He would take what he needed to finally claim his rightful place above her, unaware that his very touch, tainted by envy and ambition, would begin to poison the very thing he coveted most. The night itself seemed to conspire with Kale's intentions. A violent storm had descended upon Eldoria, with thunder booming like the drums of war and rain lashing against the earth in furious sheets. It was the perfect cloak for a dark deed. Moving with a sorcerer's silence, Kale slipped past the simple safeguards on Alara's workshop, charms meant to deter curious animals, not a determined and powerful rival. The air inside was still warm from the day's work, carrying the familiar, comforting scents of polished stone, dried herbs, and ozone, the lingering trace of pure magic. And there, resting on a cushion of velvet in the center of her workbench, lay the source of his obsession, a single Palantry stone, its inner light pulsing with a slow, steady rhythm, like the heartbeat of the world. His hand did not hesitate as he reached for it. There was no moment of awe, no reverence for the artifact he was about to violate. There was only hunger. The instant his fingers closed around the cool, smooth surface, something profound and terrible occurred. The stone did not reject him. Instead, it responded. It was a conduit for intent, after all, and it drank in the torrent of his emotions. His burning ambition to be recognized as the greatest, his deep-seated doubt that he ever could be, his bitter envy of Alara's gift. These were not the selfless, unifying energies it was created for. The pure, silvery light within the stone flickered, choked, and then dimmed, as if a shadow had passed over its heart. A faint, smoky darkness began to swirl in its depths, and its steady pulse became a frantic, irregular stutter. It was the first corruption, a poison administered not through a spell, but through the simple, toxic act of a covetous touch. Kale, feeling the stone's power thrumming against his palm, mistook its distress for potential, its corruption for unlocked power. He vanished back into the storm, believing he held the key to his supremacy, utterly blind to the sickness he had just introduced into the web of fate. Miles away, Elara shot upright in her bed, her breath catching in her throat. It was not the crash of thunder that had woken her. It was a sensation far more visceral, a sharp, painful tear in the fabric of reality she had spent her life learning to sense. The harmonious song of the Palantry, a constant, gentle hum in the back of her consciousness, had been violently disrupted. One note had been ripped from the chorus, replaced by a dissonant, jarring screech of anguish and imbalance. Her heart hammered against her ribs, not with fear for her own safety, but with a devastating, maternal dread for the stone. She knew, with a certainty that chilled her to the bone, that something was terribly wrong. Pulling a shawl around her shoulders, she ran through the pounding rain to her workshop, her hope dwindling with every step. The door was slightly ajar. The space where the stone had rested was empty, but the absence of the physical object was not what made her sink to her knees. It was the lingering echo in the air, a stain of ambition and spite, a signature she recognized all too well. Her creation was gone, and it was in the hands of the one person who could truly unravel it. The harmony was broken, and the weight of mending it settled upon her shoulders alone. Dawn broke over Eldoria, but the light brought no comfort to Alara. The harmonious song of her creations still felt fractured, a constant, aching reminder of the void where one stone should be. She did not allow herself the luxury of despair. Moving with a purpose that belied the exhaustion still clinging to her bones, she gathered a small pack. It held not weapons, but tools, a crystal prism to catch and interpret the stone's lingering energy signature, a pouch of herbs for purification, and a water skin. Her most vital tool, however, was her own attuned spirit, her sensitivity to the subtle currents of fate that the corrupted Palantry was now polluting. She could feel it like a sour note on the wind, a dissonant thread pulling east, away from the safety of her valley and into the wild, untamed forests beyond. Her journey was a solitary one, a stark, contrast to the communal creation of the stones. She followed the fading trail, not with her eyes, but with her heart, a silent hunter, tracking a wounded piece of her own soul. The path led her through ancient groves, where the trees seemed to whisper warnings, and across swift, cold rivers that numbed her feet, but sharpened her resolve. The further she traveled, the fainter the stone's pure essence became, increasingly masked by the aggressive, chaotic energy Kale was imposing upon it. It was like trying to follow the scent of a single flower in a field choked with smoke. Yet she pressed on, driven by a responsibility that went far beyond ownership. This was not about reclaiming a possession. It was about healing a sickness she had inadvertently unleashed upon the world. After days of solitary travel, the trail led her to the outskirts of a small village nestled in a clearing. The homes were simple, built from timber and stone, with smoke curling lazily from their chimneys. The people, however, carried a tension that was palpable. Their greetings were guarded, their eyes flickering with a mixture of curiosity and unease. When Alara, with her worn travel clothes and intense, searching gaze, asked if they had sensed any strange disturbances or seen a lone traveler, their cautious demeanor melted into a flood of concerned whispers. An elder woman, her face lined with years of wisdom, invited Alara to share a meal by the central fire. It was there that the villagers confirmed her fears. They spoke of a shadowed man who had passed through their lands not long ago, a figure who moved with an unsettling purpose and carried something that made the air around him feel heavy and wrong. They told her of livestock growing skittish for no reason, of children having bad dreams on the night he was near, and of a general sense of dread that had lingered since. But their warnings went beyond just a strange traveler. They spoke of Kale's name being murmured in other communities, not with respect, but with a nervous apprehension. Rumors were spreading of his attempts to gather followers, promising them power and influence in a new order he claimed to be building. His influence was not yet an army, but it was a poison seeping into the soil of the land, a campaign of fear and temptation that was starting to take root. This news placed Elara at a critical crossroads, a moment of profound decision that would define her entire quest. Her every instinct screamed to charge forward, to follow the weakening trail directly to Kale's door, and demand the return of what was hers. The injustice of the theft and the escalating threat of his actions fueled a righteous anger that begged for immediate confrontation. But the villagers' tales also painted a clearer, more terrifying picture of what she was truly facing. This was no longer just about a jealous rival. It was about a man whose ambition was curdling into a tangible force, one that was already twisting the world around him. To confront him directly, in a place of his own power, armed only with her resolve and her tools of creation, suddenly felt less like bravery and more like a foolish gamble. If she failed, the stone would be lost forever, and Kale's corrupted path would be unchecked. The other path, the harder and slower one, was to seek wisdom before seeking a fight. She remembered the stories of the Council of Ancients, reclusive seers who were said to dwell in the high, forgotten places of the world. They were the guardians of balance, the keepers of knowledge about the fundamental laws that governed magic and fate, the very laws Kale was so recklessly breaking. To find them would mean diverting from the trail, potentially allowing Kale's corruption to deepen, but it would also mean arriving at a confrontation, not with anger, but with understanding. It would mean arming herself with strategy instead of sheer will. The choice was between the swiftness of emotion and the patience of wisdom. Standing there in that humble village, surrounded by people who feared the shadow she was chasing, Alara realized that reclaiming the stone was only half the battle. The real victory would be knowing how to heal it. Turning away from the direct path to Kale was one of the hardest decisions Alara had ever made. Every fiber of her being, every echo of the corrupted stone's distress, pulled her toward a swift and decisive confrontation. But the wisdom of the villagers, their shared fear of the shadow Kale was casting, had planted a crucial seed of doubt. She realized that charging in without a true understanding of what she faced was not courage, it was recklessness. The corruption was not just a stain on the stone, it was a disease affecting the very laws of balance, and to fight it, she needed more than determination. She needed knowledge, and so, with a heavy but resolved heart, she turned her steps toward the high, wind-scoured peaks, where the Council of Ancients was said to dwell. The journey into the mountains was a trial in itself, a stark ascent from the verdant, living world below into a realm of stone and sky. The air grew thin and cold, and the whispering trees gave way to silent, towering cliffs. She followed old pilgrim paths, markers known only to those who sought truth over treasure. Her progress was measured not in miles, but in perseverance, each step a silent prayer for guidance. Finally, after a climb that tested the limits of her strength, she found it, a vast natural archway leading into the heart of the mountain itself. There was no grand fortress, no obvious sign of habitation, only in profound ancient silence that seemed to welcome her. As she passed through the arch, the howling wind outside fell completely mute, replaced by a deep, resonant quiet that felt less like an absence of sound and more like the presence of something immensely old and patient. Within the cavern, soft, sourceless light illuminated a chamber so vast its ceiling was lost in shadow. Seated in a circle on smooth, worn stones were the Council of Ancients. They were not kings or warriors, but men and women whose faces were like maps of time itself, etched with lines that spoke of centuries of observation rather than decay. Their eyes, when they turned to her, held no judgment, only a deep, fathomless knowing. They did not speak with their voices at first. Instead, a wave of understanding washed over Alara, a flood of images and sensations that conveyed more than words ever could. They saw her journey, her creation, the theft, and the spreading stain of Kale's corruption, as if reading a story written on her soul. They perceived the Palantry not as a mere object, but as a living knot tied into the tapestry of fate, and they saw the dark thread Kale was pulling, threatening to unravel not just one destiny, but the pattern of countless lives connected to it. One of the elders, a woman with hair as white as mountain snow, finally spoke, her voice a soft rustle that seemed to come from the stone around them. "You seek to reclaim what was taken," she said, not as a question, but as a statement of fact. "But you misunderstand the nature of the wound. The stone is not merely stolen, it is infected." The sorcerer's touch introduced a poison, the poison of selfish will into a vessel designed for harmonious flow. To simply take it back is to bring the sickness home with you. Another elder, his hands resting on his knees as if feeling the pulse of the world beneath them, continued the thought. This corruption does not remain isolated. It bleeds into the streams of possibility. It twists potential futures, turning paths of prosperity into roads of ruin, seeding visions of discord where there should be dreams of unity. Left unchecked, it risks creating a fracture in fate itself, a point of weakness that could shatter under pressure. The Council's assessment was terrifying in its scope. This was no longer a personal conflict between two artisans. It was a threat to the fundamental order Alara had sought to strengthen. The solution they offered, however, was even more daunting than the problem. The white-haired elder leaned forward, her gaze holding Alara's with an intensity that felt both gentle and inescapable. To heal this, you must do more than retrieve the stone. You must heal the stone itself, and such healing cannot be forced. It cannot be commanded. It can only be invited through a ritual of absolute self-sacrifice and perfect clarity. They described a ceremony that required the healer to offer a piece of their own life force, their own untainted connection to the flow of time, to act as a conduit for purification. It was a transaction of spirit, a willing exchange of one's own vitality to scrub the poison of another's ambition from the sacred object. The cost would be high, leaving the performer weakened and vulnerable, but it was the only way to restore the balance without destroying the Palantry entirely. The Council's final counsel was not a command, but a solemn truth. The true battle was not against Kale, but for the soul of the stone itself. Victory would be measured not in triumph over a rival, but in the restoration of a sacred harmony. Meanwhile, high in a secluded tower that scraped the underbelly of the clouds, Kale was utterly consumed by his prize. The chamber was a chaotic reflection of his mind, cluttered with half-finished experiments, scorched parchments, and the lingering, acrid smell of magic pushed beyond its natural limits. The stolen Palantry sat at the center of it all, resting on a stark obsidian pedestal. Its light no longer the soft, rhythmic pulse Elara had given it. Now it flickered erratically, a frantic, unstable heartbeat of deep amber and bruised violet, the smoky corruption within it swirling like a trapped storm. To Kale, this was not a sign of sickness. It was proof of potential, a raw, untamed power waiting for a master strong enough to harness it. His failure to create his own had only cemented his belief that true power wasn't built through patience, but taken through force. His experiments began not with reverence, but with demands. He surrounded the stone with amplifying crystals, geometric arrays designed to focus and intensify magical energy. He channeled his own considerable power into it, not as an offering or an invitation, but as a command. He poured his frustration at years of being overlooked, his burning pride in his own unmatched skill, and his deep-seated need to prove his superiority directly into the Palantry's core. He was not seeking to understand the stone's connection to fate. He was trying to hijack it, to bend the river of time itself to his will, and make it flow toward a single destination, his own undeniable glory. Each session was a violent assault on the artifact's fundamental nature, an attempt to override its sacred purpose with his own selfish desires, and the stone, in its corrupted state, responded. It was created to show truth, to reflect the intricate, interconnected web of cause and effect. But poisoned by Kale's ambition, its visions became twisted mirrors, reflecting not what was or what could be, but what he wanted to see. He would gaze into its depths and see fragmented, dazzling glimpses of a future crafted from his own ego. He saw vast crowds kneeling not in peace, but in fearful submission. He saw cities gleaming under his banner, their beauty a testament to his rule. He saw rivals, including a faint, blurred image of Elara, bowing before his unmatched might. These were not prophecies, they were fantasies, illusions conjured from the toxic cocktail of his own emotions, fed back to him by the stone's broken magic. Each vision was a drug, feeding his arrogance and blinding him to the reality of what he was actually doing. The more he saw, the more he craved. The visions of glory were addictive, reinforcing his belief that he was on the right path. He mistook the stone's distressed, chaotic output for a sign of its awakening power, a beast he was finally taming. He didn't see the danger, he only saw the potential for dominion. His confidence swelled into a dangerous hubris, convincing him that every flicker of dark light, every shudder of the stone on its pedestal, was merely the last resistance of a tool learning its true master. He was so captivated by the grand illusions of conquest that he became completely blind to the subtle, physical changes occurring in the Palantry itself. For the stone was suffering under this brutal treatment. The constant barrage of conflicting, forceful energy was tearing it apart from the inside. The corruption Kale had introduced was a flaw, a weakness in its crystalline structure. And as he continued to pump more and more unstable power into it, that flaw began to manifest physically. It started almost invisibly, a hairline fracture so fine it was like a strand of spider silk etched into the stone's smooth surface. Then another appeared, branching off from the first, then another. With each experimental session, the cracks multiplied, creeping slowly across the Palantry like a web of impending shatter. They were a silent scream of structural failure, an undeniable sign that the artifact was fundamentally unstable, pushed far beyond the limits it was designed to bear. But Kale, lost in his visions of triumph, either did not notice or willfully ignored the truth staring him in the face. He was so busy looking into the future that he failed to see the catastrophe taking shape in the palm of his hand. The visions began as everything Kale had ever wanted. Gazing into the corrupted Palantry's swirling depths, he saw a world reshaped in his image. The initial glimpses were intoxicating. He saw himself standing on a towering balcony of obsidian and gold, looking down upon a sea of faces, not just hundreds, but thousands, all with their eyes turned up to him in a mixture of awe and terror. The air thrummed with a silence born of absolute submission. In this future, his word was law, his power unchallenged. He saw the gleaming spires of a capital city that had not existed before, built by the forced labor of those who had once doubted him, a monument to his genius that would stand for millennia. He saw the other Palantry stones, not as independent beacons of wisdom, but as glittering jewels set into his throne, their power siphoned and channeled directly through his will, making him the sole architect of destiny. For those first glorious moments, the stone gave him exactly what he craved: validation. It was a perfect, self-affirming loop. His ambition fed the stone's corruption, and the corrupted stone fed him visions of his ambition fulfilled. But the Palantry was not made to tell lies. It was created to reveal truth, and even in its poisoned state, its fundamental nature could not be entirely erased. It could twist the truth, refract it through the prism of Kale's own darkness, but it could not generate a pure falsehood. The vision began to curdle at the edges. The adoring, Fearful crowds below his balcony shimmered, and their faces changed. Their expressions of awe did not vanish, but they were now layered over with something else, a deep, hollow emptiness. The eyes that stared up at him were not just afraid, they were devoid of hope, of spirit, of any spark of individual will. They were a populace broken, not just ruled. The magnificent city of obsidian and gold, when he looked closer, showed cracks. The gleaming surfaces were not polished stone, but a brittle, shell-like facade. And between the towering spires, in the narrow, shadowed alleys he had not noticed at first, was movement. Not the orderly march of soldiers, but the furtive, desperate scrambling of people living in squalor, hidden just out of sight of the grand thoroughfares. Then the vision shifted entirely, yanking his perspective away from the triumphant balcony and plunging him into the streets below. The sound of adulation was replaced by the muffled sounds of suffering, the crying of a child in a darkened doorway, the harsh cough of a sick elder with no one to care for them, the whispered arguments of families over scraps of food. He saw a mother hiding a piece of bread, her eyes wide with a fear that was entirely domestic and utterly heartbreaking. This was not the fear of a respectful subject. It was the terror of a creature living under a boot. The vision pulled back further, showing him the lands beyond his perfect city. The forests where Alara had drawn her inspiration were now gray and withered, their life force drained to feed the endless construction of his vanity projects. The rivers ran sluggish and polluted. The very sky seemed hazy and dim, as if the world itself were sickening under the weight of his unchallenged rule. The stone was showing him the cost. It was revealing the ecosystem of suffering required to maintain the pinnacle of power upon which he stood. The most jarring shift was yet to come. The vision zeroed in on a single point, a small, forgotten shrine at the edge of the withered woods. There, a group of haggard figures huddled around a faint, guttering candle. They were not plotting rebellion or whispering curses against his name. They were simply sharing a story. An old man, his voice cracked with age but clear with conviction, was speaking of a time before the shadow, of a woman who had woven light into stone to connect people, not to control them. He spoke of harmony and choice, of a legacy built on hope, and as he spoke, the faces of the listeners, even the children, softened for a moment. Their eyes, which had been so empty, glimmered with a memory of something else, something better. This tiny, fragile pocket of resistance wasn't built on weapons or armies. It was built on a story. It was the memory of what Alara had intended, and it was utterly indestructible. It was a truth that his power could not reach, could not crush, and could not extinguish. The vision ended not with his glory, but with this quiet, haunting scene of defiance. A single candle flame, refusing to be snuffed out in a world of imposed darkness. Kale recoiled from the Palantry as if it had burned him. His heart was hammering, a cold sweat beating on his forehead. For a single, terrifying moment, he had seen it all, not just the glittering prize, but the terrible price tag attached. He had witnessed the hollow core of the future he was building, the profound, soul-crushing silence that would follow his victory. The vision was a warning, a clear and undeniable prophecy of the discord he would sow. A wiser person, a more humble soul, might have taken a step back. They might have seen this horrific glimpse of suffering as a sign that their path was flawed, that their methods were poisoning the very outcome they desired. They might have realized that a victory built on the ashes of a world is no victory at all. but Kale's defiance was forged in a fire far hotter than his fear. The vision did not humble him, it insulted him. The sight of that tiny candle flame of hope, that stubborn refusal to be erased, felt like a personal mockery. He interpreted the warning not as a truth to be acknowledged, but as a challenge to be overcome. The Palantry, he decided, was not showing him an inevitable outcome. It was showing him a test. It was presenting him with the worst-case scenario, the strongest possible resistance, and daring him to overcome it. His mind, twisted by envy and pride, rationalized the entire experience. The suffering he saw was not the consequence of his actions. It was the price of doing business, the necessary collateral damage on the road to greatness. Those people in the alleys, that mother hiding bread, they were weak, and the strong had no obligation to the weak. The memory of Alara's legacy was not an indomitable truth. It was a sentimental obstacle to be systematically eradicated. Shaken but utterly unswayed, he placed his hands back on the stone, his jaw set with a new, grim determination. If the Palantry could show him this potential future of discord, then it could also show him how to prevent it. He would not heed the warning, he would crush it. He would double his efforts, channel not just his ambition, but his entire will into the stone, and force it to show him a path to a victory so absolute that not even a single candle of hope could remain lit. He would bend fate itself to his will and erase any future that did not end with his total and unquestioned dominion. The lesson was offered, but he refused to learn it. Instead, he chose to escalate, setting himself on a direct collision course with the very fabric of reality. Guided by the ancient knowledge shared by the Council, Alara knew she could not confront Kale in his tower of pride. The corruption was a spiritual sickness, and it required a spiritual cure in a place of natural power. Her journey led her to a hidden grove, a place where the veil between the mortal world and the realm of the celestial spirits was said to be at its thinnest. She arrived as the sun began to set, casting long, deep shadows through the ancient trees. At the center of the grove stood a circle of smooth, white stones surrounding a natural basin of clear water, fed by a silent spring. This was a place of quiet power, of acceptance and healing, the absolute opposite of the forced, chaotic energy of Kale's workshop. Here, she would not fight the corruption. She would invite it to release its hold. As twilight deepened into a velvety night, the full moon rose, a colossal silver coin hanging in the star-dusted sky. Its light did not simply illuminate the grove, it transformed it, pouring through the canopy of leaves to dapple the forest floor in shifting patterns of liquid silver. The air itself seemed to hum with a soft, resonant frequency, a harmonic note that set Alara's own soul vibrating in tune. This was the time. She placed the corrupted Palantry gently into the basin of water. The moment it touched the surface, the water around it darkened, as if a blot of ink had been spilled, and the stone's frantic, flickering light cast sickly reflections on the surrounding trees. It looked like a wounded animal, terrified and lashing out. Elara did not begin with a complex incantation or a show of force. She began with silence. She sat at the water's edge, closed her eyes, and stilled her own mind. She let go of her anger at the theft, her fear of Kale's growing influence, and her anxiety for the future. She focused instead on the memory of why she created the stone in the first place, not for control, but for connection. She pictured the harmonious flow of time, the endless river of cause and effect, of choices and consequences, and she held in her heart the pure intention of wanting to understand that flow, to learn from it, and help others navigate it with wisdom. This was the clarity the council had spoken of, a perfect, selfless focus on the stone's true purpose. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper, yet it carried through the grove with impossible clarity. These were not words of command, but words of invitation. She did not demand the corruption leave. She asked the light within the stone to remember itself. She recounted the story of its creation, speaking of the starlit spirits and the primordial song she had woven into its core. She described the hope she had felt, the vision of a tool that would serve all of Eldoria. With each word, she offered a piece of her own life force, her own spiritual energy, into the water. It was a willing sacrifice, a transfusion of pure intent to counteract the poison of selfish ambition. She felt a tangible draining sensation, as if a vital warmth was flowing from her heart, down her arms and out through her fingertips into the water, directed toward the suffering stone. The reaction was immediate and violent. The dark cloud around the Palantry swirled furiously, resisting the gentle assault of her purity. The water in the basin churned, and the stone itself shuddered, emitting a low, grating sound that was utterly alien to its nature. It was fighting the healing, clinging to the destructive energy Kale had fed it. Alara's body trembled with the effort, her face pale and beaded with sweat. The cost was even higher than she had anticipated. It felt like she was trying to lift a mountain with her bare hands, but she did not push harder. She simply held her intention, steady and unwavering, a lighthouse beam in Kale's emotional storm. She continued to offer her energy, her voice growing weaker, but never losing its gentle, inviting tone. Then a shift occurred. The furious churning of the water began to slow. The dark, inky cloud seeping from the stone started to break apart, not vanishing but rising like a mist from the water's surface, where it seemed to be dispersed and neutralized by the moon's cleansing light. The stone's erratic, sickly flickering softened, then stuttered, then went dark for one heart-stopping second. In that moment of total silence and darkness, Elara held her breath, her offering complete. She had given all she could, and then it returned. A single, steady point of light ignited in the very center of the Palantry. It was small at first, no bigger than a pinprick, but it was pure, silvery white, the color of starlight and hope. It grew, slowly and surely, pushing back the last remnants of the shadow until the entire stone was glowing from within, with its original, gentle, rhythmic pulse. The light reflected off the now clear water and onto Alara's face, illuminating her exhausted but triumphant expression. The harmony had been restored. The stone was healed, but as she reached into the cool water to retrieve it, she saw that the healing was not a simple erasure. The physical cracks that Kale's experiments had caused were still there, a fine, web-like network of lines across its surface. They did not look like damage anymore. They looked like a map. They were scars, permanent records of its journey through corruption and its return to the light. The stone glowed with its original purpose, but its light now shone through these fractures, creating intricate patterns that told a story of suffering, resilience, and ultimate redemption. It was no longer the innocent, firstborn creation. It was something wiser, something stronger, tempered by its ordeal. It held the memory of both shadow and light, and that dual knowledge made its connection to fate deeper and more profound than ever before. Elara cradled it in her hands, feeling its familiar warmth, and knew that this was not an end, but a new beginning. Returning to her valley with the purified stone cradled in her hands, Alara felt a profound shift within herself. The ordeal had not only healed the Palantry, it had fundamentally transformed her understanding of its purpose. She had witnessed firsthand how a single stone, corrupted, could threaten the balance of fate itself. But she had also proven that its light, when rooted in selflessness and clarity, could overcome even the deepest shadows. This hard-won knowledge sparked a new, more ambitious vision. She would not create just one stone. She would create a symphony of them, a diverse chorus of guided intent that could support and strengthen one another, creating a network of light so resilient that no single act of envy could ever hope to extinguish it. Her workshop, once a place of solitary creation, now hummed with a new energy. She sought out not just the purest crystals, but those with unique inherent qualities, each one whispering of a different potential. For her next creation, she chose a deep, clear sapphire that seemed to hold the patience of 1,000 years within its depths. As she carved and shaped it, her intention was not a general connection to time, but a specific attunement to the quiet, accumulated knowledge of ages, the essence of wisdom. The incantation she wove into its structure was a song of contemplation and understanding, a plea for insight over impulse. When its light finally kindled, it glowed with a steady, azure radiance that seemed to invite deep thought and calm reflection. Next, she took up a fiery carnelian, its warm hues reminiscent of a beating heart and unwavering resolve. This stone was not for quiet contemplation. It was for action. As she worked, she focused all her thoughts on the concept of bravery, not the absence of fear, but the strength to move forward in spite of it. She remembered her own fear in the sacred grove and the courage it took to offer her own energy for healing. She channeled that memory into the carnelian, binding it to the quality of moral courage, the fortitude to do what is right even when it is difficult. When it awakened, its light pulsed with a warm, amber glow that felt like a bolstering hand on the shoulder, a whisper of encouragement in a moment of doubt. Her third stone was the most challenging. She used a sphere of flawless amethyst, a stone often associated with vision and intuition. For this Palantry, she sought to imbue the gift of foresight, not a rigid map of the future, but a gentle nudge toward potential outcomes, a glimpse of the branching paths that lay ahead based on present choices. The ritual required immense concentration, a delicate balancing act between seeing and not interfering, between knowing and not controlling. Its light, when it came, was a soft, shimmering violet that seemed to shift and dance at the edge of perception, hinting at possibilities without ever revealing absolutes. With these 3 masterpieces complete, Alara faced her most crucial task, finding their guardians. She knew the stones themselves would be useless, even dangerous, in the wrong hands. Power without wisdom is tyranny. Courage without foresight is recklessness. She journeyed once more across the land, but this time she was not tracking a sickness. She was searching for strength of character. She did not look for the most powerful mages or the wealthiest nobles. She sought out individuals whose lives were testaments to the very qualities she had woven into the stones. The guardian of the sapphire stone of wisdom was an elderly archivist named Oren. who had spent his life preserving the history and stories of his people, believing that the past was the only true guide to the future. He was a man of quiet thought, who valued knowledge not for power, but for the sake of understanding. The carnelian stone of courage was entrusted to Kale's opposite in every way, a young farmer named Bryn. When a sudden flood had threatened her village, she had not fought the water with force, but had organized a human chain to evacuate the elderly and the children, leading the effort with a calm determination that inspired everyone around her. Her bravery was born of compassion and community, not personal glory. The amethyst stone of foresight was given to a reclusive weaver named Anya, a woman known for her incredible tapestries that somehow always seemed to echo events yet to come. She understood patterns, the way threads interwove to create a larger picture. She respected the subtlety of possibility and knew that a glimpsed future was a responsibility, not a guarantee. To each of these guardians, Alara presented the stone not as a trophy or a weapon, but as a sacred duty. She spent weeks with each of them, teaching them not just how to listen to the stone's gentle guidance, but crucially, how to resist the temptation to misuse it. She taught them that the stone's power was a partnership, a conversation. It was a tool to enhance their own innate qualities, not a crutch to replace their own judgment. They were to be stewards, not masters. The true network she was weaving was not one of control, but of interconnected guardianship. Each stone, held by a worthy heart, became a beacon of its specific virtue, creating a web of shared destiny that strengthened the entire land. A decision made with Oren's wisdom could be acted upon with Bryn's courage, while Anya's foresight could help them choose the most harmonious path forward. They were separate, but they were never alone. They were the first line of defense, a living testament to Alara's evolved dream, a dream where light was multiplied, shared, and protected by the collective goodness of those chosen to bear it. And so, the legacy of the Palantry stones began to weave itself into the very fabric of history, moving from the hands of one generation to the next in a timeless dance of stewardship. Oren, the wise archivist, spent decades with the sapphire stone, consulting its depths not for personal gain, but to help settle disputes with fairness, to find precedents in ancient patterns that could guide new laws, and to remind leaders that true wisdom often lies in understanding the long consequences of short-sighted actions. When his time came to choose a successor, he did not seek another scholar buried in books. He chose a young diplomat known for her ability to listen to all sides of a conflict with empathy and patience, understanding that wisdom without the compassion to apply it is just empty knowledge. Bryn, the courageous farmer, carried the carnelian stone for a lifetime, its warm glow a constant companion as she led her community through seasons of drought and storms. Her bravery was never about dramatic, single acts of heroism, but the quiet, daily courage of rebuilding after a flood, of sharing scarce resources without complaint, of standing up to local bullies who threatened the vulnerable. The stone's light seemed to grow warmer and more steady with every small, selfless choice she made. When she passed the stone to her own daughter, a healer who risked her life to tend to the sick during a terrible plague, she did so with the knowledge that courage takes many forms, and all of them make the stone's light stronger. In her secluded cottage, the weaver Anya and her successors used the amethyst stone of foresight with a gentle and reverent touch. They understood that to see a potential future was to hold a tremendous responsibility. They never shouted prophecies from the rooftops or tried to force a specific outcome. Instead, they offered subtle guidance, a suggestion to a king to store extra grain before a harsh winter the stone had hinted at, a quiet word to a merchant to avoid a certain trade route during a season of unrest, a gentle nudge to a community to repair a weakened bridge before the spring rains came. Their actions, guided by glimpsed possibilities, averted countless disasters that never happened. Their successes so quiet, they often went unnoticed. This was the true strength of the Foresight Stone. It worked best when its influence was felt but never seen, weaving threads of prevention into the tapestry of daily life. Across centuries, this network of guardians, often unknown to each other personally, formed an invisible lattice of support across the land. Their stones were not tools of control, but instruments of balance. A king, advised by the keeper of the Wisdom Stone, might make a prudent decision. That decision would create stability, allowing the community guarded by the Courage Stone to flourish, which in turn created a peace that the Foresight Stone's guardian would see as a branching path toward a golden age. The stone's collective memory grew, each guardian adding not just their own experiences, but the emotional resonance of their service. The joy of a crisis averted, the relief of a hungry child fed, the peace of a conflict resolved. This accumulated goodness did not merely preserve the stone's power, it amplified it. Their light became deeper, more nuanced, and more resilient, a living library of altruism and wisdom. Yet, as their legend grew, so did the whispers. In crowded taverns and lavish courts, stories were told of these magical artifacts that could see the future, instill boundless courage, or grant infinite wisdom. With each telling, the truth was often stretched. The stones were no longer described as guides that required a pure heart to use, but as simple keys to unlimited power. These whispers traveled on the wind, reaching the ears of those who saw not a sacred duty, but an opportunity. Ambitious warlords dreamed of seizing the Courage Stone to create an invincible army. Greedy merchants coveted the Foresight Stone to monopolize trade and amass unimaginable wealth. Tyrants desired the Wisdom Stone to outmaneuver all their political enemies at once. The very qualities that made the stones beacons of hope also made them irresistible targets for those who believed power was meant to be seized, not earned. This created a new and more complex challenge for the Guardians. Their role evolved from simply using the stones wisely to also protecting them from this rising tide of greed and ambition. They could no longer be open about their possession of the artifacts. The role became one of secrecy as much as service. The stones were hidden in plain sight, the Wisdom Stone disguised as a mere paperweight on a scholar's desk. The Courage Stone passed off as a family heirloom in a farmer's humble home. The Foresight Stone incorporated into the central pattern of a weaver's latest tapestry. The Guardians learned to live double lives, their great power masked by outward ordinariness, their profound impact on the world hidden behind a veil of simple, everyday existence. They protected the light by ensuring the world often forgot it was even there, a necessary deception to preserve the very truth they served. For generations, the Palantry stones had been a quiet, benevolent force in the world, their influence felt in times of peace and crisis, like an unseen hand gently guiding a ship through fog. But all constants, no matter how well-intentioned, eventually face the test of time and scrutiny. In the bustling, scholarly city of Ethelberg, far from the misty valleys and sacred groves of the stone's origin, that test found its voice in a man named Thuron. He was not a sorcerer like Kale, hungry for power, nor a guardian with a sacred duty. Thuron was a historian, a man whose life's work was dedicated to the meticulous study of primary sources, to facts uncolored by myth or sentiment. His world was one of dusty scrolls, logical deduction, and the unwavering belief that truth was something to be excavated, not received. It was in the deepest, least visited archives of the great library of Ethelberg that Thuron made his discovery. He was researching trade routes of the 4th century when he stumbled upon a collection of fragmented personal letters and diaries that had been misfiled and forgotten. These weren't the grand, official histories that celebrated the Palantry and their guardians. These were the quiet, worried musings of ordinary people who had lived in the shadow of the stone's golden age. One letter, from a village mayor to a friend, expressed a deep unease about a proposed dam project being cancelled on the advice of the local Foresight Stone's keeper. The mayor wondered if the harsh winter the stone predicted might have been weathered with the dam's help, lamenting that the community had surrendered its own problem-solving ingenuity to an artifact's vague warning. Another diary entry from a young artist confessed a paralyzing anxiety about making any life choices, constantly worrying that her path was not the right one according to the grand, predetermined tapestry of fate the stones were said to oversee. To Thuron, these were not just interesting anecdotes. They were evidence of a profound philosophical crisis everyone had overlooked. He began a dedicated search, and the more he read, the more a consistent, troubling pattern emerged. The text spoke of a subtle cultural shift, a slow relinquishing of personal agency. Why strive for wisdom through hard experience when you could consult the sapphire stone? Why dig deep for courage in a moment of fear when the carnelian stone could provide a boost of resolve? Why make difficult choices with the information at hand when the amethyst stone might offer a glimpse of the outcome? Thuron began to formulate a powerful and dangerous argument. The Palantry stones, for all their celebrated benefits, were not empowering humanity. They were infantilizing it. By outsourcing wisdom, courage, and foresight to these fate-bound objects, people were atrophying their own most vital muscles, the muscle of learning from failure, the muscle of building genuine courage through action, and the muscle of making choices and living with the consequences, which is the very essence of free will. He compiled his findings into a series of compelling, fiercely logical public lectures delivered not in the ivory towers of the university, but in the city's vibrant agora, where merchants, artisans, and travelers could all hear his case. He was a captivating speaker, his arguments clear and grounded in the relatable human stories he had uncovered. "We speak of the stones as guides," he would proclaim, his voice ringing with conviction. "But what is the difference between a guide and a master? If you always let the guide choose the path, do you ever really learn to navigate the world yourself? We are trading our birthright of choice for the illusion of security, and in the process, we are building a cage of fate and calling it destiny." His words struck a powerful chord. He gave voice to a quiet, unspoken anxiety that many had felt but never articulated, the unease of feeling like a passenger in one's own life, of following a script written by ancient magic instead of penning one's own story. His movement grew quickly, attracting not just fellow intellectuals, but anyone who felt left behind by a world that seemed to privilege a magical elite. They called themselves the Unbound, and their ideology was simple and potent. True progress and true virtue could only be earned through human effort and human choice, unfiltered by magical artifacts. They weren't villains. They were idealists who genuinely believed they were fighting for the soul of humanity itself. Their campaign to discredit the stones was multifaceted. They published pamphlets that dramatized the stories from the archives. They held debates, questioning the Guardian's authority. They spread rumors that the stones didn't predict the future, but actively shaped it to their own inscrutable ends, robbing people of any true choice at all. This wasn't the blunt, aggressive threat of a Kale. It was a sophisticated, ideological challenge that attacked the very premise of the Palantry's existence. It created a deep rift in society, pitting neighbor against neighbor, scholar against guardian, in a battle of ideas that would prove far more complex to resolve than a simple fight against a dark sorcerer. The conflict was no longer about good versus evil, but about two competing versions of what it meant to be good. The invitation arrived not with a threat, but with the cold, formal precision of a legal summons. It was a request for a public discourse, hosted by the scholars of Ethelberg, to discuss the role of ancient artifacts in modern society. The topic was broad, but the subtext was as clear as the carnelian stone Lyra, kept hidden in a simple woolen pouch around her neck. This was Thuron's stage, and she, the current guardian of the Courage Stone, was his intended guest of honor. Her first instinct, a flare of protective anger, was to refuse. To stay hidden, to protect the stone's secret as generations of guardians before her had done. But the letter was public knowledge. To decline would be seen as an admission of guilt, a confirmation of every accusation Thuron had leveled against the Palantry, that their guardians were an unaccountable, secretive elite, afraid to have their power scrutinized in the light of day. The journey to Ethelberg was a torment of conflicting thoughts. Lyra was no diplomat or orator. She was a woodworker, a woman whose courage had always been expressed through action, not words. She had inherited the stone from her grandmother, who had used its steadying presence to lead their village through a devastating landslide, organizing rescues and rebuilding efforts with unshakable resolve. For Lyra, the stone was not a crutch. It was a companion, a quiet whisper that helped her find her own inner strength when fear threatened to paralyze her. It had given her the confidence to stand up to dishonest timber merchants, to rescue a child trapped in a flooding river, to make the hard choice to cut down a beloved but diseased old tree that threatened to fall on the village hall. The stone didn't act for her, it helped her act. How could she possibly convey that subtle, deeply personal partnership to a skeptical crowd hanging on Thuron's every logical point? The debate hall was packed, the air thick with anticipation and the scent of old parchment and lamp oil. Thuron was everything she had feared, articulate, charismatic, and devastatingly reasonable. He didn't rage against magic. He dissected it with the cool precision of a surgeon. He presented his historical evidence, those fragments of doubt and dependency, and wove them into a compelling narrative about the slow erosion of human potential. We are told these stones offer courage, he said, his voice echoing in the silent hall. But what is courage that is given? Is it not, by its very nature, something that must be grown from within, a muscle that must be exercised to become strong? By relying on this artifact, do we not risk creating a world of people who never learn to stand on their own, who forever look for an external source of strength, instead of discovering the boundless reservoir that lies within themselves? The crowd murmured in agreement. His arguments were watertight, and they tapped into a very modern desire for self-reliance and individual agency. When it was Lyora's turn to speak, her mouth went dry. The words she had prepared felt hollow and defensive in the face of his clean logic. She spoke of her grandmother, of the landslide, of the quiet ways the stone had helped her community. But her stories sounded like sentimental anecdotes against Thuron's formidable historical framework. She could see in the eyes of the audience a polite curiosity, but not conviction. Thuron listened with a faint, pitying smile, and when she finished, he delivered his gentlest, yet most damaging blow. "These are beautiful stories, truly," he conceded, his tone almost kind. "But they are just that, stories. They are unverifiable. They are the mythology that has been built up around these objects to justify their existence. We have moved past the age of myth. We live in an age of reason, of evidence. Can you offer any tangible proof that this stone does anything other than provide a psychological comfort, a placebo effect for the weak-hearted?" The question hung in the air, and in that moment, Lyra faced the core of her dilemma. Thuron's concerns, she realized with a sinking heart, were not entirely wrong. He had twisted them, but the seed of truth was there. Had some guardians over the centuries become over-reliant? Had some communities abdicated their own problem-solving skills? Her duty was to protect the stone, to keep it secret and safe. The safest thing to do now would be to retreat, to thank Thuron for his perspective, to offer some placating words about tradition, and to leave this hostile city, preserving the stone's secrecy at the cost of its reputation. It was the path of prudence, the path every guardian's instinct screamed at her to take. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, she saw not an enemy, but people who were genuinely afraid of losing their autonomy, afraid of a power they didn't understand. Hiding would only feed that fear. It would confirm every suspicion Thuron had planted. Protecting the stone wasn't just about keeping it physically safe. It was about protecting the truth of what it was. And the truth was not a secret to be guarded, but a value to be demonstrated. Right then, a commotion erupted at the back of the hall. Shouts and screams pierced the air, followed by the acrid, unmistakable smell of smoke. Panic exploded through the room as people leaped from their seats, rushing blindly toward the blocked main exits, creating a crushing, terrified bottleneck. In the chaos, Thuron stood frozen, his rational world instantly replaced by primal terror. Lyora's hand flew to the pouch at her neck. This was it. The choice was no longer theoretical. She could use the stone's energy to fuel her own strength, to fight her way to a window and escape, preserving the secret. Or she could do what the stone was truly meant for. Closing her fingers around the warm carnelian, she did not ask it for courage for herself. Instead, she opened her heart, thinking not of her own safety, but of every single person in that hall. She focused on the love for her community, the desire to protect, the absolute selflessness that is the true wellspring of bravery. The stone's warmth bloomed into a radiant heat, that shot through her, not as a foreign power, but as an amplification of her own fierce, protective intent. She did not scream for calm. She climbed onto the heavy wooden debate table, making herself a beacon in the chaos. Her voice, when it came, was not a shout, but a clear, resonant command that cut through the panic. "Look at me," she roared, and for a split second, hundreds of terrified eyes flicked toward her. "The main door is jammed. You are crushing each other." The side exit, behind the blue curtain, is clear and unlocked. Help your neighbor, move together now. Her instructions were specific, immediate, and born of a clarity that felt superhuman. Then, seeing a young man trampled underfoot, she leaped from the table, not away from the danger, but directly into the heart of the surging crowd. The stone's energy flowed through her, not as a magic shield, but as an unshakable calm and a terrifying strength. She physically pulled people apart, creating a pocket of space around the fallen man, her movements precise and powerful. She directed a group of strong bystanders to form a human chain to guide people toward the side exit, her voice unwavering, her presence a rock in the raging river of fear. It was over in minutes. The fire, started by an overturned lamp in an anteroom, was quickly extinguished by the city watch, who had been alerted by the smoke. The hall was emptied without a single life lost, though many were shaken. As the crowd gathered in the safety of the town square, gasping and tending to minor injuries, a strange silence fell. All eyes turned to Lyra, who stood with her hand still pressed to the now cooling stone beneath her tunic, her clothes disheveled, her face smudged with soot. She had not performed a magic trick. She had not glowed with an unearthly light, but every person in that crowd had witnessed something undeniable, a level of leadership, clarity, and selfless courage that felt beyond ordinary human capacity in the face of such sudden, mortal terror. Thuron approached her, his face pale, his earlier confidence utterly gone. He had been just another terrified soul in the crowd, and he had seen his philosophy of pure self-reliance shatter in the face of a crisis that demanded immediate, collective action, guided by an unwavering leader. He looked at her not with suspicion, but with a dawning, humbled awe. You knew what to do," he stammered. "You weren't afraid." Lyra met his gaze, her voice soft but firm with the gravity of what had just transpired. "I was terrified," she confessed, and the admission shocked everyone who heard it. "The stone does not remove fear, Master Thuron. That is not its purpose. It does not give courage. It helps you find your own. It amplifies the courage that is already there, the courage born of love for others, and lets it shout louder than the fear shouting inside you. My proof is not in a story from the past. It is in the fact that you are all standing here, safe, right now. That is what the stone does. It doesn't replace our will. It serves it." She had not hidden the stone's power. She had revealed its true nature through an act of pure, undeniable service. The debate was over. The demonstration had begun. The success in Ethelberg was a powerful rebuttal to Thuron's arguments, but Lyra knew a single act of courage was not enough to mend the deep ideological rift that had formed. The whispers of doubt persisted, and the guardians, once hidden protectors, now found themselves the subject of intense public scrutiny and debate. It was in this tense atmosphere that the sapphire stone of wisdom, held by the archivist Orin's successor, began to pulse with a new, urgent rhythm. For days, the keeper would find herself drawn to its cool, azure light, receiving not a clear vision, but a persistent, unsettling feeling, a profound sense of impending thirst, a vision of cracked earth and stunted crops, a silent scream from the land itself. The stone wasn't just predicting a dry season, it was foreseeing a catastrophic, multi-year drought that would cripple the entire region, a disaster that would fuel desperation and turn the philosophical debate over the stones into a very real battle for survival. Understanding that this was a crisis no single guardian could face alone, and seeing a critical opportunity to demonstrate the Palantry's true purpose, Lyra sent out a call. Using a network of trusted messengers and subtle signs known only to the guardians, she summoned them to a neutral, sacred place, a high meadow known as the Sunken Bowl, a natural amphitheater where the veil between the physical and the spiritual was said to be thin. One by one, they arrived, a disparate group who had never before been in the same place. There was the keeper of the Wisdom Stone, a quiet cartographer from the northern coasts, whose maps were famed for their uncanny accuracy. There was Lyra herself, the carpenter, still bearing the quiet confidence earned in the fire-filled hall. They came from all walks of life, these stewards of fate, united not by title or power, but by a shared and solemn responsibility. The atmosphere was initially thick with a cautious uncertainty. These men and women were used to working in isolation, interpreting their stone's guidance for their own communities. The concept of combining their powers was not just unprecedented, it felt dangerously close to the very concentration of power that Thuron and the Unbound movement feared. Lyra stood before them, not as a commander, but as a fellow guardian. She spoke not of conquest or control, but of cooperation. She described the Wisdom Stone's dire warning and framed the coming drought not as a problem to be solved by magic, but as a challenge to be met by a community empowered by it. Our stones are not meant to work alone, she explained, her voice carrying across the silent bowl. They are like instruments in an orchestra. One can play a beautiful melody, but only together can they create a symphony that can truly alter the course of events. This is not about demonstrating power. It is about answering a call for help from the land itself. The ritual they devised was a delicate and beautiful thing. It required not force, but harmony. They formed a circle in the center of the meadow, each guardian holding their Palantry aloft. The goal was not to command the weather, an act of arrogance that would have surely failed. Instead, guided by the Wisdom Stone's precise understanding of aquifers and weather patterns, they sought to gently encourage what was already possible. The Courage Stone provided the unwavering focus and resolve needed to maintain the delicate connection, and the Foresight Stone, well, its role was to be the guide, to help them see the most harmonious path among countless possibilities, to find the thread of a future where the rains returned without causing destructive floods elsewhere. As the sun reached its zenith, they began. There was no grand display of light, no roaring winds. The power was subtler, a thrum of energy that made the very air seem to vibrate. It was the sound of focused intention, a collective plea woven from wisdom, bravery, and hope, directed into the fabric of the world. For 3 days and 3 nights, the Guardians maintained their vigil, rotating in shifts, their strength sustained by their shared purpose. They were not rulers bending the world to their will. They were stewards, gently tending to its needs, and the world responded. On the 4th morning, the first clouds appeared on the horizon, not the bloated, violent clouds of a storm, but a soft gray blanket that promised a long, steady, soaking rain. It began as a gentle drizzle that washed over the parched land, and it continued for days, replenishing reservoirs and seeping deep into the thirsty soil. The drought had been averted. The success was not a dramatic victory, but a quiet miracle. Farmers who had been fearing the worst looked to the skies with relief, unaware of the silent symphony that had played out on their behalf. The demonstration was complete. The Palantry, used in harmony and for the collective good, had proven their value beyond any myth or story. Yet as the gentle rain continued to fall and the guardians prepared to depart, a new unease settled over the gathering. In the profound silence that followed their shared effort, each keeper became acutely aware of their own stone's unique song within the chorus. The wisdom stone hummed with quiet satisfaction. The courage stone thrummed with warm, steady resolve, but there was a silence where a fourth melody should have been. The keeper of the amethyst stone of foresight, a reclusive tapestry maker named Elara, had never arrived. In the urgency of the crisis, her absence had been a worrying footnote. Now, in the calm, it became a gaping void. Lyra reached out with her senses, with the faint connection all guardians shared, seeking the unique signature of the Foresight Palantry. She found nothing, not a faint echo, not a whisper of its presence. It was not hidden or quieted. It was simply gone, its connection to the web of fate severed as completely as a snuffed-out candle. The triumph of unity was instantly overshadowed by a chilling new mystery. They had saved the land from a natural disaster, only to discover that a man-made calamity had already struck, leaving a hole in their ranks and a critical piece of their shared destiny missing. The silence left by the missing Foresight Stone was a void the other guardians could feel in their very souls, a constant, unsettling hum of absence where there should have been a flowing melody of possibility. Tracking its trail was nothing like following the violent, corrupted energy of Kale's theft centuries before, that had been a wound, a screaming tear in the fabric of fate. This was different. This was a fading whisper, a signature that was not corrupted, but extinguished. It was as if the stone had simply ceased to be, leaving behind only the faintest memory of where it once was. The keeper of the wisdom stone, the cartographer, was the first to find a clue, consulting his sapphire Palantry not for a vision, but as a focus for his own immense knowledge. He recalled a series of odd inquiries from months ago. A historian from a distant university had written to him, asking unusually specific questions about the geological composition of the valleys near Eldoria, the types of crystal found there, and the folk tales surrounding seeing stones. At the time, the questions had seemed merely academic. Now they felt like a roadmap. The trail led them to a cluttered, book-filled study in the university city of Viridia, a place that smelled of old paper, dust, and a deep, desperate curiosity. They found their man not as a villain lurking in shadows, but as a man lost in his own obsession. Alistair was a historian, a man whose life's work was the rigorous, evidence-based study of the past. For him, the Palantry stones were not living artifacts of fate. They were the ultimate unsolved historical puzzle. He had grown up on the same myths as everyone else, but where others saw magic, he saw a gap in the historical record. How were they really made? What were their physical properties? Were the effects psychological or something more? He believed that by applying the cold, clear light of science to these legendary objects, he could demystify them, understand them, and perhaps even replicate their supposed effects for the betterment of all. His intention, in his own mind, was pure. He wasn't seeking power like Kale, he was seeking truth, but his methodology was a form of violence all its own. He had not stolen the stone in the dead of night. He had, through meticulous research, deduced the identity of its guardian, the tapestry maker Alara, and had presented himself at her cottage as a fellow scholar. He had shared his theories, his impressive knowledge of mineralogy and ancient languages, and had appealed to her sense of historical preservation. He argued that the true story of the Palantry was being lost to myth, and that a proper academic study was needed before the knowledge faded forever. Elara, an elderly woman who had lived a life of quiet intuition, was swayed by his passion and his apparent respect. She had, against her own deeper instincts, allowed him to examine the amethyst sphere. It was a fatal error of trust. Alistair's examination was everything the stone was not. Where a guardian's touch was a conversation, his was an interrogation. He measured its dimensions and weighed it on a precise scale. He subjected it to beams of focused light, trying to chart its refractive index. He attempted to scratch its surface with tools of escalating hardness to test its durability. He even tried to record the low hum it was said to emit, using delicate audio equipment that heard nothing but silence. With each clinical, impersonal test, he was not learning about the stone, he was telling it what it was. He was defining it by what it weighed, how it reflected light, what it was made of. He was trying to quantify its soul with calipers and scales. The Palantry of Foresight, an artifact woven from intention and connection, could not comprehend this language of cold analysis. It was created to interact with the heart, with intuition, with a reverence for the unseen. Faced with a world view that acknowledged only the tangible and the measurable, the stone did not fight back. It did not shatter or lash out. It simply retreated. It turned its light inward, severing its connection to the flow of fate, as a sea creature might retreat into its shell when poked by a stick. Its vibrant violet light dimmed to a dull, lifeless gray, becoming, for all intents and purposes, a beautifully crafted paperweight. Alistair, frustrated by his failed experiments and believing the stories of its power to be exaggerations all along, had kept it as a curious curio, a testament to the power of superstition over fact. He had no idea he hadn't proven the stone was inert. He had caused it to become so. When the guardians finally confronted him in his study, they found a man not of malice, but of profound, bewildered failure. He gestured to the dormant stone on his desk, surrounded by his instruments, and sighed with genuine disappointment. "You see," he said, his voice heavy with the weight of a collapsed theory. "It's just a stone, a very fine piece of amethyst, to be sure, expertly carved, but there's no magic here, no connection to fate. It seems the legends were just that beautiful stories." He expected them to be fellow debunkers, to agree with his rational conclusion. The look on their faces, not anger, but a deep, empathetic sorrow, stopped him cold. Lyra stepped forward, not to accuse, but to explain. She picked up the dormant sphere, cradling it not as an object to be studied, but as a wounded thing. "You were asking it the wrong questions, scholar," she said softly. "You were speaking to it in a language it cannot understand. This was never a tool for measurement." It is an instrument for connection. It doesn't respond to force of any kind, not even the force of intellectual curiosity. It responds only to the honesty of an open heart. You sought to dissect its origins, and in doing so, you asked it to deny its own existence. So it has gone to sleep, waiting for someone who remembers how to listen. Alistair looked from the stone in her hands to the shelves of books that contained his entire understanding of the world, and for the first time, he felt the limits of his own knowledge. He had not solved the mystery, he had silenced it. The cost of his reckless pursuit of knowledge was the very truth he had sought to find, leaving the Guardians with a profound new challenge. How does one awaken a dream that has chosen to forget how to dream? The dormant stone rested on a workbench in Finn's quiet workshop, looking less like a legendary artifact and more like a geological specimen. It was a perfect sphere of amethyst, cool and inert to the touch, its surface a dull, lifeless gray. For days, Finn, the great-great-grandson of the legendary Alara, had simply sat with it. He hadn't tried to measure it or test it. He hadn't chanted any incantations from the old journals he'd inherited. His first act was one of listening, of trying to hear the silence it now held. He understood, deep in his bones, that Alistair the historian hadn't broken the stone, he had offended it. The Palantry of Foresight was an entity of connection and intuition, and it had been met with clinical analysis, with a worldview that valued only the quantifiable. In response, it had done the only thing it could. It had turned its light completely inward, retreating into a profound slumber to protect its essential nature from a language it could not comprehend. Finn's approach was the absolute opposite of force. He knew the stories of Kale's violent attempts to dominate a stone and of Alistair's intellectual assault on this one. Both had failed because they started from a place of taking. Finn's only chance was to start from a place of giving. He began not with magic, but with craftsmanship. He spent hours carefully, lovingly, polishing the stone's surface with a soft, oiled cloth, not to change its shape, but to care for it. As he worked, he didn't focus on awakening it. He focused on apologizing to it for the disrespect it had endured, for the clumsy hands and colder intentions that had handled it. He poured his regret and his reverence into every slow, circular motion, his touch as gentle as if he were calming a frightened animal. This was the humility the situation demanded, an acknowledgement that the stone was not a tool to be used, but a partner to be respected. When the stone's surface gleamed under the lamplight, he moved to the next stage of his ritual, one that came from the oldest, most instinctual part of his heritage. He began to sing, but these were not the complex, primordial words of power that Elara had used in its creation. His song was wordless, a simple, melodic hum that rose and fell like a gentle tide. It was a lullaby in reverse, a call not to sleep, but to wake. He sang of dappled sunlight filtering through forest leaves, of the quiet mystery of a branching path, of the soft wonder of not knowing what comes next. He was not commanding the stone to see the future. He was reminding it of the beautiful, unpredictable nature of possibility itself. He was offering it a vision of the world it was created to love, a world of subtlety and wonder, not of cold, hard facts. For a long time, nothing happened. The stone remained a silent, gray sphere, but Finn did not stop or become discouraged. His intent remained pure and steady, an unwavering beacon of patient invitation. He was not performing a task with an expected outcome. He was engaging in an act of faith. And then, a change occurred. It was so faint, it could have been a trick of the light. A single, tiny point deep within the stone's core flickered, a minuscule speck of violet light that glowed for a heartbeat and then vanished. Finn's breath caught, but he did not alter his song or his rhythm. He simply continued, his offering now holding a thread of shared hope. The speck returned, this time holding steady. Then another appeared nearby, and another, like distant stars igniting one by one in a twilight sky. The light began to grow, not in a sudden explosion, but in a slow, gentle swell, spreading from the center outward. The dull gray was consumed by a deep, luminous violet that pulsed with a soft, rhythmic light. The light itself seemed different than before, cleaner, sharper, more focused. It wasn't just the stone's power returning, it was its essence being refined by the ordeal. The cracks that had formed under Kale's, touched generations ago, the fine web of scars that marked its history of suffering and healing, now glowed with particular intensity. They were no longer flaws, they had become conduits, channels through which the purified light shone with even greater clarity, each one a permanent record of a lesson learned, a resilience earned. Then the vision came. It wasn't a confusing barrage of images or a single, imposing prophecy. It was a crystal clear picture that unfolded in Finn's mind with the serene simplicity of a truth finally understood. He saw a seedling pushing through dark soil, its path not predetermined but full of potential. It could seek the sun, it could be trampled, it could find water. He saw a painter contemplating a blank canvas, a universe of choices contained in the single moment before the first brushstroke. The vision was a perfect illustration of what foresight truly was, not a rigid map of a fixed future, but a deep understanding of the beautiful, branching tree of cause and effect, of choice and consequence. The stone was not a dictator of destiny, it was an illuminator of pathways. Its power was not in showing what will be, but in revealing what could be, and in doing so, empowering the choice of what should be. As the vision faded, the stone settled into a steady, vibrant hum, its light warm and alive in Finn's hands. The reawakening was complete. The lesson was profound and undeniable. The bond with fate could never be seized through force of will or dissected by intellect. It could only be earned through the quiet virtues of reverence and humility. It required a heart willing to listen, to offer, and to partner, rather than a hand eager to command. The stone, tempered by its long silence and awakened by pure intent, was now more powerful than ever, not because its magic was stronger, but because its connection to the true, nuanced nature of destiny had been deepened and made whole. The arrival of the stranger was announced not with a fanfare, but with a profound and unsettling silence that fell over the Guardians' gathering. One moment, the air was filled with the soft, harmonious hum of the active Palantry stones. The next, the sound was joined by a new, deeper resonance, a steady, grounding thrum that felt like the earth itself taking a slow, deliberate breath. All eyes turned to the edge of the sacred grove, where a young woman stood, her posture neither threatening nor submissive, but simply present. In her hands, she cradled an object that made the very light around it seem to bend. A Palantry stone, but unlike any they had ever seen. Its light was not the pure silver of Alara's first creation, nor the vibrant blues, ambers, or violets of the others. It glowed with a deep, smoky quartz radiance, its light steady and warm, but shot through with dark, intricate filaments that looked less like cracks and more like the roots of an ancient, weathered tree. It was the original stone, the one corrupted by Kale and purified by Alara, and it carried the weight of every choice that had ever been made about it. The woman introduced herself as Lyra, and her name was a whisper on the wind, a known legend from a story of shame. She was the last descendant of Kale's bloodline, a family that had carried the burden of his envy for generations, each one wrestling with the dark inheritance in their own way. She did not come to apologize for her ancestor. His actions were his own, and an apology would be too small a thing to cover such a vast transgression. Instead, she came to offer understanding, and with it, a dire warning. The stone in her hands, she explained, had been her family's penitent project for centuries. While other branches of their lineage had tried to forget or even repeat Kale's folly, her direct line had chosen a different path: to listen to the stone. They had spent generations not using it, but meditating with it, studying its unique nature, and through patient, humble reflection, helping its chaotic energy settle into a hard-won, profound stability. It was no longer corrupted, but it was not purely good in the way the others were. It was something else entirely, a stone of reconciled duality, of integrated shadow. It remembered ambition, but had learned patience. It recalled the hunger for power, but now understood the strength in balance. And because of this unique perspective, this stone saw things the others could not. While the network of guardians had been focused on mending small tears in the fabric of fate, averting droughts, guiding leaders, preventing disasters, this stabilized stone had been feeling the strain on a much larger scale. Lyra spoke of a deep fracture, a fundamental weakness in the tapestry of destiny itself, caused by that original act of corruption centuries ago. Kale's attempt to seize control of fate had not just wounded a single stone, it had created a hairline crack in the foundation of possibility, a flaw that had been widening under the constant pressure of time, exacerbated by every subsequent act of doubt, envy, and forceful will. The recent ideological war with Thuron's Unbound movement had stressed it further. This was not a crack that would cause an immediate, dramatic end. It was a slow leak, a gradual dimming of potential futures, a closing off of paths of hope and wonder. Left unmended, the world would not end with a bang, but with a sigh, a slow descent into a fate where fewer and fewer choices were possible, where destiny became not a flowing river, but a predetermined, narrowing ditch. Her offer was as breathtaking as it was terrifying. She proposed a final, unified ritual, but not like the one used to call the rain. That was a gentle encouragement. This would be an act of profound, surgical repair. She suggested that the stabilized stone, with its memory of both corruption and healing, could act as a bridge. It could connect the pure, harmonious energy of the other Palantry to the precise location of the ancient fracture, but it could not do it alone. It required the full, willing, and united power of every guardian and every stone, channeled not as separate instruments, but as a single, focused chord of intent. The goal was not to impose a new future, but to mend the loom on which all futures were woven, to restore the full spectrum of possibility that was every soul's birthright. The risk was immense. To pour their collective will into such a delicate operation would leave each of them utterly vulnerable, their life force tied to the success of the ritual. Failure could unravel them along with the fracture, scattering their essences across the threads of time. But the alternative, a world slowly losing its ability to choose, to hope, to change, was a far darker prospect. After a moment of heavy silence that seemed to stretch for an eternity, the keeper of the wisdom stone was the first to step forward, placing a hand on his glowing sapphire. He did not speak, but his eyes held a determined clarity. The choice was, in the end, no choice at all. This was the purpose they had all been prepared for, the reason the stones had chosen them. One by one, the other guardians joined him, forming a circle around Lyra and the unique, root-like stone she held. They did not see her as an outsider, but as the missing piece of a puzzle they had never known was incomplete. As the last guardian took their place, a powerful synergy ignited between the stones. The air crackled not with violent energy, but with a potent, focused peace. The deep, thrumming pulse of the stabilized stone became the bedrock rhythm, and the melodies of the wisdom, courage, and foresight stones wove around it, their lights merging into a brilliant, white-silver beam that shot upward, not into the sky, but into the fabric of reality itself. There was no sound, but a feeling of immense cosmic pressure, as if the universe itself were holding its breath. The guardians poured their collective will, their hopes, their fears, their love for the world, their unwavering belief in free will, into the light. They were not rulers commanding fate to obey. They were stewards offering it the strength to heal itself. They felt the fracture then, a cold, aching absence in the flow of time, a void that threatened to swallow possibility. Guided by Lyra's stone, their combined energy flowed into that void, not filling it by force, but inviting it to remember what it was to be whole. It was an act of reweaving, of reknitting, each thread of light, a suture closing an ancient wound. The effort was excruciating, a drain on the spirit that felt like it would never end. But just as the last of their strength seemed about to fade, there was a final, soft click of cosmic realignment, a sensation of deep, resonant peace that washed back over them. The light vanished. The stones in their hands still glowed, but now their light was softer, wiser, deeply interconnected. The fracture was healed. The ancient wound caused by Kale's envy was finally, truly sealed, not by erasing the past, but by integrating its lesson into the very heart of destiny. The Palantry were now, and would forever be, exactly what Alara had first intended, guides for those who sought to navigate the river of time, never again its masters. And so we arrive at the final, quiet truth of the Palantry stones, a truth that stretches far beyond the mists of Eldoria and the echoes of ancient magic. These artifacts, born from one woman's vision and tempered by centuries of trial, are no longer merely objects of power. They have become something far more profound, living testaments to the delicate, essential dance between free will and fate. Their light, which once pulsed with the solitary dream of a master artisan, now shines across the ages as a beacon of collective wisdom and hard-won unity, reminding us that our choices are the threads, and destiny is the tapestry they weave together. Elara's true legacy was never about crafting a key to unlock the future or a tool to command the flow of time. Her greatest creation was not the first stone itself, but the idea it represented, the radical notion that the most powerful force in the universe is not control, but connection. Her legacy lives on, not in the hands of those who seek to dominate destiny, but in the quiet courage of every individual who chooses to listen to the whispers of wisdom, to learn from the scars of the past, and to act with a heart oriented toward the greater good. It endures in the archivist who seeks understanding over authority, in the farmer who builds community in the face of disaster, and in the weaver who sees patterns of possibility rather than paths of predetermination. The stones themselves are the ultimate teachers of this balance. They do not shout commands, they offer insights. They do not remove obstacles, they illuminate pathways around them. They ask not for blind obedience, but for engaged partnership. A Palantry shows a potential future not to insist upon it, but to empower a choice. It offers a surge of courage not to replace your own, but to help you find it. It provides wisdom not to think for you, but to help you think more clearly. This is the sacred contract Elara unknowingly wrote into their very essence, that true power is a dialogue, never a monologue. This is why the stones could never truly fall into darkness, despite the envy of a Kale or the skepticism of a Thuron. Their fundamental nature rejects absolute control. They respond to purity of intent, to the selfless desire to serve and connect and heal. They bind not to the hunger for power, but to the resilience of hope, to the unshakable belief that a better future is always possible if we have the wisdom to see it, the courage to build it, and the humility to build it together. They are and will always be guides, not masters, not rulers, not oracles, but faithful companions on the long, winding, and beautiful road of human choice. Their gentle light a constant reminder that while we cannot control every current in the river of time, we are always forever the ones who choose how to steer